Quick disclosure before we start. AI-assisted tools were used in parts of the research and production workflow. Final editorial judgment, risk posture, and release approval stayed human-led. This is operational guidance, not legal advice. These are my opinions and are not representative of any organization. This is AI Change Desk. Thank you for choosing to tune in. You know that feeling when a workflow that felt clean on Monday suddenly feels a little haunted by Thursday? Same prompt, same team, same tabs, and yet the output is flatter. The speed is weird. One person has access to something another person does not, and everybody starts doing that very normal office thing where we all act like this is probably just a one-off, which is professional language for we do not know what changed, but we would like it to stop happening near us. That is one side of this week. The other side is Patreon saying podcasters earned more than $629 million on the platform in 2025. So, on one side, upstream model behavior and workspace controls keep shifting. On the other side, direct pay audience behavior keeps looking more real. And if those sound like separate stories, I do not think they are. I think they are the same operating question wearing different clothes. And just to keep this disciplined, I am not trying to turn this into some giant floating essay about the whole state of AI. This week is two signals. One, upstream governance drift. Two, downstream membership signal. OpenAI's release notes kept moving through April 9th, 2026, and the workspace governance help pages keep reinforcing the same thing. Defaults are not static. Fallback behavior is not static. Access assumptions are not static. And look, to make that less abstract, the April 9th release notes said GPT 5.3 Instant Mini replaced GPT 5 Instant Mini as the fallback model people hit after rate limits for GPT 5.3 Instant. That is exactly the kind of change that sounds tiny until a workflow starts feeling different and nobody can explain why. Which means your production workflow can feel different before anybody on your team has technically changed anything locally. That matters more than people admit, because when a workflow suddenly feels slower, flatter, or more expensive, most teams start by blaming the prompt, or the user, or the person who happened to be on shift. Sometimes the answer is much less dramatic. The platform changed, the routing changed, the default changed, the workspace shape changed. The image I keep coming back to is this. AI operations now feel a little bit like cooking in a kitchen, where somebody keeps relabeling the spice jars at 2 in the morning. Not enough to burn the building down, just enough to make Wednesday's sauce taste slightly untrustworthy. And then somebody says, maybe the chef is off today. No, maybe cumin is cinnamon now. That is what upstream drift feels like. And the reason I keep pushing this point is that the failure mode is so ordinary. One producer is on one model path, another producer is effectively on a different one. The team thinks they are arguing about taste, they are actually arguing about configuration. But configuration arguments are less glamorous, so we disguise them as editorial disagreements and then wonder why everybody leaves the meeting slightly annoyed and spiritually dehydrated. And if your team is discovering that drift through irritation instead of through review, you are already spending trust. Internal trust, workflow trust, eventually audience trust, if the downstream work is public. And this is where I think teams get weirdly sentimental about tooling. We say things like, well, everybody's using the same stack, or we did not change anything important, or it is probably just a rough day for the model. Which, sure, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe the more honest sentence is, we have built real workflow dependence on a system we are only casually monitoring. That is a very different sentence, less soothing, much more useful. Because once a workflow matters to output, or client work, or public publishing, you do not get to manage it entirely through intuition and crossed fingers. So the first operator point this week is simple. Treat release notes and workspace controls like a live operating surface. Not product chatter, not optional reading, a live operating surface. Every Wednesday, snapshot the default model, snapshot any meaningful fallback path, confirm who can access what, confirm who can create, edit, or share GPTs, confirm whether third-party GPTs and action domains are restricted the way you think they are. Run 3 checks on the workflow that matters most: normal path, edge case, escalation path, and write down one spend guardrail before usage expands. Because if the platform can move quietly, your review rhythm cannot be passive. That is the organizing principle on the governance side. Not be paranoid forever. Not read every release note like it is a prophecy carved into a mountain. Just, if the floor can move, check the floor before you sprint. Now put that next to the second signal. Patreon says podcasters earned more than $629 million on the platform in 2025. Pod News covered that number on April 9, 2026. And the scale detail is part of why this matters. Patreon says more than 47,000 podcasters are creating there, supported by 7.6 million paid memberships. And obviously the dumbest possible takeaway would be, great, excellent. We simply walk outside with a tote bag and $629 million falls into it. That is not the lesson. That is dehydration with branding. The real lesson is more useful. Direct pay listener behavior is strong enough that packaging decisions deserve operational attention, not just occasional growth team optimism. If listeners are willing to pay for depth, access, consistency, or a better tool around the content, then the monetization conversation should not live in some separate magical chamber where everybody says community 12 times and nobody names an owner. It should live next to production, right next to it. Annoyingly close to it, honestly, because otherwise what happens? You get one group talking about offers in broad emotional language. You get another group talking about quality and workflow drift in dry operational language. And then everybody acts surprised when the audience experience feels stitched together by a committee that only communicates through weather patterns. Because the same team is deciding what gets published, what quality level is acceptable, what can be promised, and what is trustworthy enough to put behind an offer. And to be clear, I am not talking about inventing some giant premium universe with velvet ropes and 10 membership tiers and a ceremonial PDF. I mean one test. One clean test. Maybe the worksheet gets tighter and more useful. Maybe paying listeners get early access to the operator memo. Maybe you run one short member Q&A and see what questions actually come back. The point is not scale on day one. The point is learning whether trust converts more cleanly when the offer is specific. That is why these two stories belong together. If upstream model behavior shifts, that affects quality. If quality shifts, that affects confidence. And if confidence shifts, your monetization experiments stop being abstract very quickly. Because would someone pay for this is not really a marketing question first. It is partly an integrity question. Do we understand the workflow well enough to promise something sharper? Do we know where quality can wobble? Do we know what we are actually asking people to trust? That is the serious layer under the revenue conversation. So do not run one meeting about platform drift and another meeting about packaging 3 days later. Run one Wednesday loop. Ask, what changed upstream, what that does to quality or spend, what we are packaging downstream, and what experiment is worth trying before next week. From the audience side, this is all one system. They do not care whether the wobble came from a release note change, a fallback path, a permissions issue, or a tired workflow. They just experience, does this feel sharp? Does this feel reliable? And is it worth deeper trust? That is the sincere point underneath all this. You cannot build trust downstream with a totally vibes-based understanding of what is moving upstream. And I want to keep the scope tight here. Not every AI story belongs in this loop. These two do, because one changes what your workflow is actually doing, and the other changes what your audience may actually value enough to pay for. That is a complete operating question by itself. So here is the concrete move. By Wednesday, April 22nd, 2026, run one 45-minute review and publish. Ops/revenue/AI brief model governance membership loop 2026-04-22 MD. Required sections: current model and fallback configuration snapshot, top 3 workflow quality checks, membership offer test for the next episode, and one spend guardrail. Owner, operations lead with editorial and growth. No giant task force. No 9-tab strategy document. One review, one artifact, one clearer loop. And if your team hates this idea on first contact, that is fine. Most useful operating discipline initially sounds like an administrative insult. Then, 2 weeks later, it sounds like relief. Watch the release notes. Watch the workspace controls. Watch the membership signal. Then, make one calm weekly decision rhythm out of all 3. I am Michael Hanna-Boutros-Meyering. This is AI Change Desk. AI news you can use, and change management you can execute. This is AI Change Desk. See you next time.